So, good morning and welcome to our continuation of our study through Revelation. We've made it to chapter 6 and we took kind of a detour last time to look at Daniel 9 because it's such a integrated part of understanding the book of Revelation. So this morning we're just going to very, very fast work through what we did last time. What took 40 slides will take 10 or something, so it's going to be just a very quick high-level overview, meaning if you missed last week, you may want to go back and watch the video if you get lost in this quick review, but we will endeavor to finish the chapter this morning. All right, so Revelation 6, here at the beginning, we begin to see the Lamb, Christ, open these 7 seals. This is what's being dealt with here in this section. And he says, I looked and behold a white horse, and its rider had a bow and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. So we dealt with last week, what is this white horse? And often we think of like this, the rider is, that's the Antichrist. Well, I would make the argument that it's peace. In other words, each one of these things isn't a person that has a rider, but the rider is death, or the rider is whatever. This one, I believe the rider is actually peace, which is brought in by the Antichrist. So yes, it is associated with the Antichrist. We then went to Daniel 9 to kind of see this unpack a bit. And a bunch of slides last week to illustrate this point, but it is in Daniel 9, the prophecy says, from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem, so it's not just the temple, but it's the city itself, to the coming of the anointed one, that would be the Messiah, there would be these 7 weeks and then another 62 weeks. And I wanted to come back to that one more time. I had several after class say, why do we think weeks mean years? The issue is the word used there doesn't mean week, it means a set of 7. And they would often use that word to associate a week because that's 7 days. So it's not the word week, it's a word that means a set of 7 something. And they often used it that way in the language. So when we translate it to English, there is no English word that means set of 7. So, like you can't say a couple, that would mean 2. It's not saying 2, but if I say a couple, you know that means 2. There is no word that means 7. So we use week because that's our closest English word that we can use. As we study through it, we realize this set of 7 has to be years. It doesn't make any sense to think of literal weeks or months. It would have to be years because the building of Jerusalem and all that would take more than 70 weeks, or 70 months. So anyway, so if we take the weeks, 7 times the number 7, you get 49. Do the same thing with 62, you get 434. If we convert that to days, you get 173,880 days. That is the number of days from the going out of the decree to the coming of the Messiah. That's what's being described there. I'm not going to read through this, but in Nehemiah, and if you want to make note of this, maybe on your sheet where you can find these references, it's Nehemiah 2, 1-8 is where you see that decree go forth. There's actually 4 decrees to rebuild Jerusalem, but most of them relate to the temple. This is the one that relates to the city itself, and that's why we choose this one. That happened, if we go back in time and apply our calendar to it, it would have been the equivalent of March 14th, 445 BC. You come to the triumphal entry of Jesus. This is the day that Christ set up everything to fulfill the coming in of the Messiah. There's a prophecy we looked at last time in Zephaniah, I believe. I think it's 9:9. Where it says the Messiah will come in on the colt, on a foal of a donkey. And he does at this day. And they're singing the Messianic psalm over him as he's coming in. If you were to do the math again, it comes out to April 6th, 32 AD. So if you look at the difference between March 14th, you add 173,880 days, you end up at exactly April 6th. The point is, this prophecy is multiple years long. It's 173,000 days later, and it's on the day precise. That's how precise this prophecy in Daniel is. Go ahead.
360-day year.
And they are 360-day years. And if you want an explanation of that, come talk to me after and I'll give you our best guess at it. But it is interesting. There's like 12 ancient calendars, and all of them are 360-day years. And they all shift at about 701 BC to 365-ish. They're all a little different. But so something major happened in 701. And I'll tell you my guess on that if you want to come talk to me. All right. So why do we take the time frames in Revelation so literally? Why do we think 7 years means 7 years, or 42 months means 3.5 years, or 1,260 days? Why do we think that's an actual thing rather than symbolic? And the reason is they're part of Daniel's prophecy. They're that last week of Daniel's prophecy. Remember it said there'd be 7 and then there'd be 62. Well, if you add those together, that's 69. So from the going out of the prophecy, or the going out of the command to rebuild the temple or the city, to the coming in of the Messiah, that is exactly 69 sets of 7 years. That means there's 1 week or 1 7-year period left. And if the first 69 were precise to the day, we could assume that that seventh set of 7 would be precise to the day. And then that's added onto by the Spirit of God through His Word when He says it'll be 1,260 days, it'll be 42 months, it'll be 3.5 times time and half a time. We haven't really come to that yet, but we'll see it. My point is, it's over and over and over. It's stating in every way we can imagine, this is literal. This is not figurative. So, and that'll become important as we move forward, but I wanted you to see that's partly why we see it that way. The other thing I want you to see, as the Antichrist makes this treaty, or he enforces an agreement between himself and Israel, that's what initiates this last 7-year period. And we're going to see that in the section here we're about to look at, and it'll be a quick review as well. But this, if you want the detail on how we came up with this 173,880 days, it is in a book called The Coming Prince. There's a bunch of variations of it, and that's one. You can find it on Amazon. Okay, so as we moved on through Daniel 9, it talks about then there is this other 7-year period. And at the halfway point of that, at 3.5 years in, he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering, that would be in the temple, and on the wing of abomination shall come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. So it's describing what the Antichrist is going to do halfway through this period of time where he has made this commitment to protect Israel. So we answered the question last time, who is the one who makes desolate? And it is the Antichrist. What does it mean to make desolate? What is that talking about? And we're told that more specifically in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4, where it says, who opposes and exalts himself, that's the Antichrist it's speaking of, against every so-called God and object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. That's what desolates this temple, is he walks in to the Holy of Holies and makes himself out to be God. That desolates the temple. And by the way, takes his seat in the temple. So let's say this were happening today. Would that be possible? There's no temple, right? There is no temple for him to go into. And in the prophecy, it says they would destroy the temple and the sanctuary. So what's interesting as you're reading through Daniel 9, it's all destroyed, and half a verse later he's in the temple doing stuff. So it indicates even in the prophecy there's going to be some kind of a big gap here because you're going to destroy it and then you got to rebuild it and then he's going to desecrate it. So, and we now know that that gap is about 2,000 years or so far, and we don't know how big that gap will end up being.
So it's so exact on 173,000. Do you get anywhere in this study where you talk about how exact people have looked at it for that 2,000 years or predicting the end?
Oh, you mean
are you going to get to that?
Meaning, is there any indication of how long the gap is? No. In fact, we're explicitly told you can't know. Only the Father knows, the Son does not know. And it just remembered me. You had a question or a comment. I skipped it. Sorry.
No, I got it.
Oh, you did? Okay.
360.
Oh, that's what it was. All right, yeah. Go back here.
Maybe you're going to run by this later on, but the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, okay?
Right.
And it's going to be rebuilt, but we've been on that Temple Mount, and there's a mosque there.
Yes.
And from where I can see, Antichrist is not, he is only going to be worshipped, and will he annihilate all other religions?
Yeah.
That mosque, will it stand?
Yeah. And I'm going to say, obviously, we don't know. But there is interesting things that they've just recently figured out, that they think potentially the temple was not where they originally thought it was. There's multiple things that indicate that the temple might not have actually been where they've been thinking it was. So in other words, it's like there's this misunderstanding that they thought it was here, so when the Muslims take over Jerusalem, they hurry up and go in and build a Dome of the Rock, so that the Jews can never build their temple there, right? Blocking that from happening. But the reality is the temple is actually maybe a little further south, and there's nothing on that site currently. So
is that in the desert area?
No,
then?
it's like right there. It's just over 500 feet or 1,000 feet or whatever. And so my point is, if they were ever to actually conclude that, whether it's even true, the Antichrist may be able to convince Israel enough that they're like, great, let's build our temple there then. And all of a sudden you've got all those things that are there currently, plus the temple gets built in an area that would not cause World War III. And that maybe is how it happens. The point is, we have no idea. It's all speculation on our part. And I really don't think we'll be here to see it happen. I mean, we'll see it happen, but from the balcony, so to speak. So one question back here.
I don't know all the details, but I have heard that Putin in Russia is even negotiating and talking about helping get that done. Yeah. And a lot of countries that, what in the world would they want to do that for? Yeah. It makes sense if you know the whole story, but it seems like it's starting to get serious.
Let me give you this, and I didn't pull up the whole text of 2 Thessalonians 2. But in 2 Thessalonians 2, it says that the Antichrist will not be revealed until the restrainer is removed. That's this verse. So let me talk about that real quick. And it says, and you know what, not who, you know what is restraining him now, so that he may be revealed at his time. In other words, he is not going to be revealed until that what that's restraining him is gone. Okay? For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Let me deal with that real quick. Think about this. Satan, along with us, does not know when the rapture is going to happen. He doesn't know when the second coming is. He's the one that has to have an Antichrist figure ready to go. God's not saying, okay, now next Tuesday, get your guy ready, right? So for 2,000 years, he's had to have a guy ready. There have been hundreds of antichrists waiting in the wings that have never been used by Satan. Might that have been a Hitler? You know what I mean? I don't know. Could have been somebody that we all look at as really good. Because remember, he's going to be a really good guy at the beginning. And in one of these days, the rapture occurs and, okay, come on, it's your turn, get in here. And the Antichrist steps onto the stage. That's the thing to think about. So when it says the mystery of lawlessness is already at work, he's already here. He's just waiting for the restraint to be pulled off. Go ahead.
Won't he have to be an apostate Jew for Israel to receive?
Not necessarily. There's some indications he might be Jewish. And I'll give you just a quick example. There's a word that's like, I think it's other in the English, and it can be different of the same kind or different of a different kind. There's two different Greek words, and one of them talks about Jesus, and then it refers to the Antichrist, and it's different of the same kind. So people from that infer that, well, maybe he's Jewish. And I think there's some other things to that too. But you can't nail down that, yes, he will be type thing. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying he won't be. He may be. I think there's growing evidence that it may be that he is the 12th Imam of Islam. Because the 12th Imam of Islam, when you look at what's predicted about him and what's predicted about the Antichrist, there's like 22 correlations that fit perfectly. So that might be how that comes. I don't have any idea, is the point. And this tells me I won't ever know until I'm in the balcony watching it from heaven, right? Because here's the next piece of this. Only he, it just switched. It said what, now it says he. Only he who now restrains. It was saying what. Now the Spirit of God is never referred to as a what or an it. It's always he. So we've transitioned here from the what to a he. Only he who now restrains it will do so until he is out of the way. So the case I would make is the what is the church, the he is the Holy Spirit. When we're gone, he goes with us, because he's not leaving without us, right? He's not going to step out of the way and leave us here. I think this is one of the great evidences of a pre-tribulation rapture. It's not, you don't build a case on it, but it's one of the bricks in the wall that we would use, I believe. So we as the church are not restraining the we are not restraining the Antichrist. We don't even know who he is. But the Holy Spirit is the one doing that, but he's currently in us. So his presence on the earth as he embodies the church, that is this restraining force in the world that holds back the Antichrist. And when he takes us and we go to heaven, that doesn't mean that the Holy Spirit is no longer present in the world. Just like he was present before Pentecost, he'll be here after. But no longer in this way, in an indwelling way, the way he is now during the church age. Which brings us to where we didn't get to last time. So we're finally to some new material. When he opens the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." So this is, again, Jesus, that's the he. When Jesus, the Lamb, opens the second seal, I heard the second of the living creatures say, "Come." So each of these are being called forth. These judgments are being called forth by these living creatures as Christ breaks the next seal. By the way, to break the seal, you have to meet the criteria of the one. In other words, it would say like, on if it were a will, only a male descendant of so-and-so can open this seal. And you have to be able to demonstrate that you're the male descendant of so-and-so, and then you can break that seal. And then you get to the next one, and then it would have another criteria you'd have to meet. Okay, I meet that one too, and then you'd break that one. And you had to meet all of these criteria. We don't know what the criteria are, but Christ meets them. And that's what gives him the authority to crack these seals open and reveal the next section. So, what is this second seal? And he comes, and out came another horse, bright red. It was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people should slay one another, and he was given a great sword. So the question there is, who or what is the red horse? What I want you to notice here is, was permitted. Who's doing the permitting here? Christ. The one opening the seal is the one bringing forth this judgment, and he's giving the rider of the red horse, he permits him to take peace from the earth, so that people shall slay one another, and he was given a great sword. So I want you to see that, is that this isn't the red horse doesn't have power on his own. It's granted him by God, by Jesus. This is Matthew 24's account. Last time we read this section to kind of have it in our mind as we were starting into this. This section says, well, let me back up to the beginning since we didn't look at it yet this week. And Jesus answered them, saying, "See that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray." So let me talk about that real quick, because we talked about it last week. When the Antichrist comes, he's coming in deception, saying, "I'm the one you've been waiting for. I'm the Messiah," type thing. In other words, when it says "I am the Christ," that's a title. He's not saying he's Jesus. He's saying, "I'm the one you've been waiting for." Well, what I find interesting is the Muslims are waiting for the 12th Imam. I'm that. The Jews are waiting for the Messiah. I'm that. You know what I mean? We don't know how this is going to look, but I'm saying he's coming saying, "I'm that one you've been waiting for," and everyone buys into it. They're deceived. That's what's really being dealt with there, and that's what's described by the white horse. The guy who can deceive everybody comes and takes over everything. Then it says in this section, "And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nations will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom." One thing is just a person hearing of Scripture read, you might hear that and say, well, right now, I mean, there's wars and rumors of wars, and kingdom is against kingdom, and so this is a sign of that the rapture is near. This is after that. These are coinciding with the seals, and the seals are in the tribulation, and we're not here. Now, might these things start to unfold a bit like rumors of wars and things like that prior to? Sure, but that's not what this is talking about. This is referring to during the tribulation, you're going to see wars, rumors of wars, nations against nations, this conflagration of all this at a level that's not been seen, I think. And I say that because you'll notice that the horses are in the same order that we're seeing here in Matthew 24. They kind of do this and they match up really well. Go ahead, back.
I don't think, considering that all this is obviously going to be taking place, I don't think our nation will be a nation when this happens.
It's possible that we're not, yeah.
Because of our foundation in Christ.
Well, yeah.
In my mind, as you said when you were talking about the United States, if you were to take over our country, you would use our goodness against us.
Yes.
And so I feel that if all this would happen, our country probably wouldn't be as convinced of it, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Repeat for the microphone.
Yeah. He was saying, for those that didn't hear, it seems like our nation would not even be around anymore when this is taking place, because we would say stand up for Israel, or he didn't mention that, but we would push back against this kind of evil, or we wouldn't want to be part of a one world government or things of that nature. And I remember when I was his age and up till, I don't know, a couple years ago, thinking that exactly. But I think we could see this happen in a couple of ways. One, we have a massive revival, and when the rapture occurs, there's hardly anybody left. And the country's left in chaos, right? You go from 300 million to 100 million in an afternoon, that's going to be tough for that country to recover. That would be one way it might happen. Another way it might happen is what looks more likely, and that is we devolve into, we're no longer the nation we were, and who cares if they attack Israel, you know? So that seems more likely, and we may still be a nation called America. We're just not the America that everyone has known over the years. Again, don't know. So our job would be to be salt and light and do the best we can, but not try to figure out what the future is. I'm coming to you in a second. Go here first and then you.
So this passage is during this moment of the breaking of the seals after the rapture.
Mm-hmm.
who is Jesus talking to about not being led astray,
Yeah.
and they will put you to death, and you'll
Yep.
be hated for my name's sake?
Yeah. During the tribulation period, let me just make a quick answer to that.
Yeah.
There will be more people saved, it's speculated, we don't know for sure, than there were during the church age. So, the reason is we got 7 billion people on the planet, you know? I mean, when you were having most of the church age, you had a few 100 million, then maybe 1 billion, you know what I mean? We had like, what is 1 billion people 100 years ago. It just has gone like this, you know, it's that one of those scales. So this kind of population's not been around for a long time. So the number of people coming into the church for 2,000 years has not been an enormous number. And all of a sudden you now have a massive population. And if 20% of them turn to Christ, that'd be a huge number, right? So I don't know what that number is, and I'm not going to make it emphatic that there will be more, but my point is there will be millions of people come to Christ, some very quickly after the rapture, some, you know, all through the whole time period, and that's who's being persecuted. So go ahead.
Well, that was my question as well, but then the next question is, who is ministering, who is
Yeah.
missionary to these
Yeah.
people?
I'm going to answer that in two ways. One is the Spirit of God and the Word is all that would be needed, right? When we all exit stage and our neighbor's like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And they've known us, right? They're over in our house rooting around trying to find that Bible where they saw us leave with every Sunday and trying to figure out what's going on, right? So I think that might be part of that. I have taken the position of the past, and I still hold it. I'm not firm on it. I really think that those who have rejected the gospel prior to the rapture, I think 2 Thessalonians indicates they wouldn't have the ability to turn to Christ then. I'm not going to elaborate on that right now because it's not the point of the morning, but I'll deal with it in some week to come. But my point is, even if you remove folks that had heard the gospel, there's still billions of people that have never heard the gospel. So you could still have this massive revival on the earth, even if you take out those who have heard the gospel prior. And they may be able to. I don't know. I'm not emphatic, but I do think that they will not be able to. Go ahead.
We have to remember that this is not about Gentiles any longer.
Yes.
This is about the nation of Israel.
Yeah.
So the people that are going to be coming to know the Lord in mass
Yeah.
are going to be the Jewish nation. And there's very little input today with Jews accepting Christ at this point.
Yeah.
But in that's the whole purpose of the tribulation, is to get that nation converted to
Yeah.
Christ.
Yeah. And I think you will see a large number of Gentiles being saved as well, but the whole point is to restore the Jewish nation. And that's when it talks about in Romans, all of Israel will be saved. It's kind of referencing this time period as when that's going to happen. And we'll actually see that happen as we work through it. It's just not this morning. Back here.
About the 144,000 Jews too, you know?
Yes.
And it seems like there's going to be angels even
Yes.
preaching the everlasting gospel.
Yeah. So when I said I'm going to answer your question in two ways, the second way I'll answer your question is there are two witnesses we'll read about coming days. There's an angel that's circling the globe to crying out the gospel message at some point during the tribulation. We'll see that. And then there are these 144,000 Jews he mentioned. What's interesting is, I would say, if you want to know about that, come back next week. and we'll deal with that then. All right.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned. All right. One quick thing on this. Nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom. What's going on there? Isn't that the same thing? Is that being redundant? And it's not. Kingdom refers to nations, nations refer to nations, and kingdoms refer to people groups. So we're talking like blacks versus white, or Pakistanis versus Indians. I don't mean like American, I mean like people from India, right? So my point is, you have that going on, this interracial conflict along with national conflict. I think that's what's being described there. And if you go back to our section here, it says, so that people should slay one another. It isn't as much as about Britain versus Germany as much as it is, and there will be some of that, but it will also be just human conflict goes off the rails. That's what's going on here too. That's when it talks about just people permitted to slay one another. I mean, you just got running gun battles down Trier, road, or Laymeyer, you know what I'm saying? That kind of a thing. Go ahead.
They'll be fighting over our stuff.
Yeah, well, that's the take. Looting on steroids, right? All right. Global war is the answer to what is the red horse. And I would just say that is this just kind of, running gun battles throughout is what you're kind of seeing there. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, the black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand, and I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine." So, question: who or what is the black horse? So if we kind of break this down a bit, it says, "And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the living creatures saying," this quote. Who's the voice in the midst of the living creatures? Let me talk about that.
Is it famine?
Is it God?
First question would be famine. Second question is God. I'm asking questions not on the screen, and that is, who is this voice? And if we go back to Revelation 4, it says, "Around the throne and on each side of the throne were the 4 living creatures." So I hear a voice, or I hear what seemed to be a voice. So it's this voice, but it's like, it's a God voice. It's something different than a normal voice. And it's coming from in the midst of the living creatures, right? That's the throne that's in the midst of there. So from the throne comes a voice saying, and that would be God the Father, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts for a barley, or for 3 quarts of barley for a denarius." So when we go to Matthew 24, in sequence here, we've now come to famine. That's the next thing that happens, and that's what this horse is famine. Let me deal with this one real quick. And it says, "And do not harm the oil and wine." That's interpreted a couple of ways. One would be, it's become so precious, and it's like, you keep your oil or your wine in a jar, and be very careful, because if it breaks, you're not getting any more, because it's become scarce. That would be one way of understanding that. And another way of understanding it would be, it's more of a rich person's food. They've got wine and oil and this kind of thing. And therefore, it might be a way of indicating that when this happens, it's not affecting everybody the same. The wealthy still have wealth, and they still have their wine and oil, but for the average person, they don't. One of the reasons we think that potentially might be what it's saying is because a denarius, it specifically references that, the denarius was 1 day's wage. So you'd go out and work all day, and you'd receive a denarius, and then you'd go buy food for your family, things like that. So it references this day's wage, and then it starts talking about some luxuries, and so that's part of why that's thought. But I do want us to go back and look at this. "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius." So a quart of wheat would keep you going for a day on a meager diet. If I remember right, it was like a Roman century's daily ration, which you're not eating large when you're rationed. So you give this 1 quart of wheat, there's your ration for the day to keep you going, soldier, right? What this is saying is, if you work all day, you can feed yourself a modest diet. So you're a family of 5. You get to eat every 5th day. Because today you get to eat, tomorrow you get to eat, tomorrow. That's what's being described there. Barley was animal feed. Nobody wants to eat barley. So you can get 3 quarts of the junk stuff, you know what I mean? Think of it like in our setting, it's a day's ration for you or a day's ration for your dog, right? So if you're willing to eat dog food, you could feed 3 of you today. That's what's being described. It is bleak. And who says that? God. Just keep that in mind as we keep moving. All right, so,
Chris,
yep, go ahead.
third theory on the wine
Okay,
and oil
yeah.
is those were the two medications.
Ah,
That's what I was gonna say too.
yep,
Two medications of that day were wine and oil.
well, yep.
So God may have been telling them to protect that. just
Because
out
of
his
their-
mercy- Out of his mercy.
Yeah, that's good.
Good.
Okay. Yeah, I don't need to. Okay, when he opened the fourth seal, so now we're to the fourth seal. I hear the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." Every time it's the same. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its rider was Death, and Hades followed him. And they were given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with the sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth. What's the pale horse? Let me talk about this pale horse first. You often will see it pictured, if you see a picture of the four horses, this one will be, instead of like a light gray, which is kind of what it sounds like, it's a light green. And the reason is, the word we translate pale is like chloros or something in the Greek, and it's what we get chlorine from, which is a light green when it's in gas. So they've often, or I can't remember the name, the technical name, but there's another part to that. Here's my point. We think of this being this pale green type horse is what's being described. Think about a body that's died and is decaying, you know what I mean? We've all seen enough TV shows to sadly know what that might look like, and they can take on a green pallor, right? So that's what's being described here, is this pale green, and then it goes on to then talk about his name was Death, so it's describing death, and Hades followed him. And he was given authority over a fourth of the earth. So what we're saying, let's just do some rough math. We're at somewhere north of 7 billion people. X number are raptured. X number are killed off in aftermath of that, and the war and different things. I don't know what this number is going to be, but to make it simple for me, we're going to say we're down to 6 billion. Okay? 1.4 billion die in this judgment. If we're down to 4 billion, then about 1 billion would die. This is a major, major catastrophe. Just think of the logistics of trying to figure out where to put 1.4 billion rotting bodies. And you've got very few people left. I mean, half of your first responders are no longer around, and I mean, fires are breaking out, and the sanitation department's no longer working properly, and you can get the feel of how this might just very quickly spiral. What's interesting with that, as you look at this, it says given authority to over the fourth of the earth to kill with the sword. So there's still the running gun battle, so to speak. With famine, yep, it's still here, and it's getting worse. With pestilence, disease, cholera, all the stuff that would go along with unclean water supplies, things of that nature. And by wild beasts. Now you think lions and da-da-da-da-da, right? Could also be rats. Rats are the most deadly animal. I think I read somewhere that it's like they've killed more people on earth than any other animal. It's because of all the disease they bring with them. And if you eradicate all rats except a mating pair, a year later you got 1 million rats back. I mean, that's how fast they just multiply out. So the point is, it could be that. The most numerous beasts on the earth are ones we can't see, bacterias and things of that nature.
Mites.
What? Mites. Yeah. So my point is, we don't really know what this means. It could be literally dogs and animals start going crazy and start attacking people, or it could be just a reference to what you would naturally assume would happen with all these people missing, all these dead bodies around. They can't get them in the ground fast enough. There's disease spreading. Not sure. But the point is bad. It's really bad.
And this all takes place in a short time?
fairly short, but we're not sure exactly. We would think potentially somewhere in that first 3.5 years, but there's a period of peace at the beginning of that. So this may be over a year or 2-year period, something along that line. One of the things I spent more time this week trying to figure out than anything is how do you overlay these seals, trumpets, and vials with the 7 years? And there is nothing that indicates how those overlay each other. We know these are happening, but we don't know which one's happening where in the 7-year period. So there's a bunch of different guesses, and
His belief is they happen sequentially.
yes,
I mean.
yes, and I will. There are some that would argue with that, but I'll explain why I think they are sequential. Go ahead.
What does that mean, Hades?
Grave. It's the grave is what it's generally referred to. So death and then eternal, destruction kind of a thing, or so it's just another way of indicating death, and then they're off into eternity. I would think that's what that
I
means.
thought Hades was hell.
I don't think it is, but I'm willing to be corrected if I'm wrong.
Why is it
I
capitalized?
agree with your mother.
Okay. I was thinking that Hades was, see, like hell specifically is lake of fire, and no one's there until, Satan goes, or the Antichrist goes at the end of the tribulation, and then everybody else goes later at the end of the 1,000 years. Right now, people that have died are in Sheol, or I think in Hades, and that is prior to we're getting way off a rabbit trail here, but prior to the resurrection, that would have been divided into 2 halves. Abraham's bosom, where the Lazarus was in Luke, and then you have the rich man who's in Hades. So I'm saying I think it is the afterlife, but I'm not sure if this would include, because here's the other issue. You've got folks that are saved that are dying in some of these. And they're where? Well, they're in heaven, right? And this is death and Hades, so I don't know if Hades is some more of a general reference to afterlife, or,
I think it is, and then when.
And I'm with you on that. What I'm saying is I don't think it is the lake of fire, which to me is what hell is.
Well, that's after when the
Yeah,
judgment.
yeah,
You're
yeah.
raised from Hades if you're an unbeliever.
Right.
Or you're raised from.
Right.
If you're in
So I
heaven,
would say
you're
afterlife is what it
after
means, but not the lake of fire. Are we all? Go ahead.
The lake of fire, hell is thrown into the lake of fire.
Oh, that's true.
later.
Yeah, very good
If you
point.
get- if you get into a
Yeah.
little bit later and
I've even read that multiple times and hadn't made that connection. So yeah.
Place of departed spirits.
Yes, let's call it that. Hades is the place of departed spirits.
I looked that up.
Okay.
In Old Testament, it is Sheol.
Sheol, yeah, there you go.
In New Greek, it's the place
Yeah.
of departed spirit.
Yeah. So I think we are actually all on the same page. Go ahead.
Probably that simply means that only the unsaved are going to be part of this death process.
Here, you mean.
Those people, the tribulation saints, will not die because of this particular.
I got you. Okay. That may very well be. Yeah. Okay. I have to think through that one more, but yeah. Okay. All right. So let's go to the 5th. We are bound to determine we are getting to the end of the chapter. When he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the witness they had borne. They cried out with a loud voice, O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? So the question I've got there is, who are the souls under the altar? One thing that can pop up is, what is this altar? Where is that at? And when you look at the tabernacle or the temple, there were 2 altars. One was the burnt offering altar out in the courtyard. Then you had an altar of incense right next to the Holy of Holies. We think this is the actual altar in heaven that the incense altar was modeled on, because everything in there was modeled on something that's in heaven. like the mercy seat would be the throne, as an example. So my point being is, we think that's the altar. It's close to the presence of God, because that was right next to the Holy of Holies in the temple and tabernacle. So these are souls, it says, and these souls, what we're looking at there is folks that have passed away, who have not been given their resurrection body yet, because therefore they're referred to as souls. They are given a white robe, but that can be symbolic, and therefore might not mean they actually have a literal body. We don't know. We're not, meaning that would be too big of a leap of conjecture. They may be given a temporary body. We don't know. But because they're referred to specifically as souls, we would say that these are folks that have died and are there under this altar. And the reason they're there is because they've been slain. And the word slain there is one that's used for the animal sacrifices. It's kind of a gruesome word. It's not died. It's like they were brutally killed, kind of a thing. They cried out with a loud voice, "O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth?" So let me deal with a couple of things here real quick. Dwell on the earth, those who dwell on the earth. It's a term used multiple times in Revelation. It always refers to the unsaved. It kind of starts to become earth dwellers. It would be a shorthand way of referring to this group. And every time you hear about those who dwell on the earth or the earth dwellers, it's always in judgment. It's always those that have rejected. So you and I dwell on the earth, but we're not of this world, right? We're foreigners. We live as aliens in a people who are earth dwellers. And that's not like science fiction type earth dwellers compared to other. It's just our destiny is to be with God. And these folks are being killed by folks who are against God, earth dwellers. Go ahead.
Could this possibly be aborted babies?
I would say no, and I'll explain why I say that here in a second. I think that aborted babies are in heaven, and that would take a whole 2 weeks probably to lay out why I would say that.
Okay.
But the reason I don't think that's these folks is because I don't think this is also saints currently that have died are there, because they've already been given their resurrection body. So I think these are folks that have died during the tribulation. So the answer to the question, I would say, is tribulation saints. Because if you or I and we had died and then the rapture occurred, we've been resurrected. We're no longer a soul under an altar. We're the 24 elders, right? These are folks that potentially have died post-rapture, but prior to this point. Go ahead.
Because the Antichrist executes, persecutes and executes with the guillotine those that refuse the mark.
Right, yeah. And I don't know that has started at this point, because we don't know how these all line up sequentially, but there is a coming martyrdom of those who are followers of Christ. And I think that's these folks. I just don't know if it includes the guillotine people yet, or if they're the ones that are going to be talked about here in a second. Because it then goes on, his answer to them is, I must have highlighted the wrong section there, sorry. It's the bottom part. Then they were given white robes and told to rest a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete. There's a specific number of martyred saints, and I don't know what that number is. We'll make it up. It's 2 million, let's call it. There will end up being 2 million souls under the altar. There's only 500,000 so far. We're going to keep going through time until we hit that number. That's what's being said here. Who were to be killed as they themselves had already been killed. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's interesting, this fourth seal.
Yeah.
And he referenced that only non-believers would be dying at this time. And then this is the opposite of the followers during that time. He said that
Right.
Hades would only the
Oh, yeah.
non-believers
Yep.
would be dying.
Right?
And then
This is the believers who have died. Yes, I got what you're saying. Yep. So we know that believers will be dying, and we know that non-believers will be dying.
well, I just, yeah.
No, I'm saying, so kind of maybe thinking it through. I'm not sure if let me just keep moving and I'll explain why I'm hesitating with what you said, and
Well, you gotta distinguish between
Yeah.
who's doing the judging.
exactly.
First one is God's judgment is not going to kill believers. The Antichrist
Will
his
kill
ju-
believers.
His
Okay.
judgment with the guillotine is going to kill the believers.
Yeah. I got to think that through more.
And I think someone was doing this study centuries ago when they came up with purgatory, because this is confusing. I mean, seriously.
This
I
is
always thought
confusing?
how they came up with purgatory.
Oh.
This is complex.
Yeah. Well, I think
I mean, it's not serious to me, but
no, but
the complexity of this is serious.
because we are on YouTube, I'm not going to give you where they came up with
Yeah, no,
purgatory.
no.
What is the fifth seal judgment? That's what we're looking at. What is it? Like there's famine, there's war, and all of a sudden we've got the beloved under the altar who have been killed. What is that judgment? Right? If we go into Matthew 24, same kind of passage we've been working through, then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. That is who's under the altar, are those that have been killed because they're being hated by all the nations. How would we define this fifth seal? And let me just tell you this, because I'm running out of time. This is 2 Thessalonians 2:1. Since indeed God considered it just to repay with affliction those who afflicted you. And then it goes on, Jesus is revealed from heaven with his mighty angels in flaming fire, inflicting vengeance on those who did not know God and on those who did not obey the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. Here's what I think is happening with this. I rewrote this thing 7 times, so I don't know if as the saints are killed, their prayers for vengeance are increased. There's more and more and more, no longer having a sin nature. They're praying for exactly what God would want, which is vengeance. And the number of those prayers keep increasing. So like as they're killing Christians, they're adding to those crying out for their vengeance, right? Increasing by the ones who are particularly precious to God. Meaning, what I mean by that is, these are folks who love him enough to die. Those are the ones that are dear to God's heart. Not that we're not dear to God's heart if we die of old age. What I'm saying is, these are folks that have shown this enormous commitment. So think of it this way, and I kind of hate to do it, but I'm not sure how else to illustrate what I'm saying or thinking. You've all seen a movie, that doesn't matter which one. Some guys say a former military person or whatever, he's got all kinds of skills and blah, 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 and somebody kills his family, right? You feel bad for the person who did that. Their life is now miserable. I mean, they're kind of being hunted down or something, right? Take that, and why do we love those kind of movies? It's because it's right. It's just. Those bad guys need vengeance brought. Now, should the guy whose family got killed do it? No, right? Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. These folks are innocent. They love God. Therefore, let's cut their head off. That's the ultimate act of injustice. And they're crying out, Lord, how long before you bring vengeance on those that are guilty? And every time one gets added, it like turns up the volume on the coming judgment. Do you see what I'm saying there? So don't see seal 5 as martyrdom. See seal 5 as just an increasing mounting rage of God, he doesn't snap and go, all right, that's it, I've had enough. It's not that at all. God is completely in control all the time. But there is an increasing level of vengeance they're piling up for themselves.
Request for vengeance.
Yeah, well, and those who are doing it are piling up more and more and more justification for that vengeance by their actions. I think that's how you might be able to describe that fifth seal. So here's the last one, sixth seal. This ends the chapter. Oh, go ahead.
So essentially, it seems like you have, let's say, this bar,
Right?
and as more die, you get closer to the top.
Yes.
So essentially, in my mind, God has this level of wrath that He wants to bring on the earth, but He won't do it until
It's filled up.
certain
Yeah.
people die. That way, in my mind, so He can get through essentially cleansing the earth.
He is going to end up cleansing the earth, and I don't want it to sound like God is restrained until He gets a certain point. He's simply predetermined. I'm not going to do this until this occurs. So hang on. We're almost there, and we'll see it break loose soon. I've got like 3 minutes, so no more questions, sorry. We're going to get through this. When he opened the sixth seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth. The full moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll that is being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Then the kings of the earth, and the great ones, and the generals, and the rich and the powerful, and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling on the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand? A lot here, we'll just make it quick. Here it kind of unfolds this section. There was a great earthquake, the sun became black, the moon was like blood, stars fall from the sky. Sky is rolled up like a scroll, every mountain and island moved from its place. People often, it's like, so is this the actual end? And I would make the case that this isn't the end. This is literally seal 6, and then you got 7 trumpets and 7 bowls. So this isn't the cataclysmic end of all things, but there is something very major happening here. An earthquake that moves mountains and islands. When it says stars falling, clearly we're not talking like real stars. When it uses that shooting star, same kind of analogy. So we're talking meteors, things of that nature. But it is done in a way where these folks get what's happening. Because the people on the earth, and by the way, who are the people? They're the kings, the great ones, the generals, and the rich and powerful. Okay, those categories. And everyone, whether they're slave or free. That's everybody else. So it's literally everybody in the world who's not with God. Hide themselves in caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling on the mountains and rocks, fall on us, right? They're hiding from what? What they're hiding from is the Lamb, the wrath of God. So I want you to see this quote here at the very end. Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne. These are unbelievers stating, hide us from he who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, right? Father, Lamb, for the great day of their wrath, plural, has come. So there is an understanding at this point, we're being brought against all of this is coming about by God. Now when it says wrath, that's my next thing there, and you could write this on there. When does the wrath of God start? There is a subset within Christianity that talks about what's called a pre-wrath rapture or a mid-trib rapture. And it is the church is raptured out right before this happens. Because the rest of it hasn't been the wrath of God, it's just been bad stuff. This starts the wrath. And I would argue, no. If you go back in the thing, it's the Lamb opened the seal. And out of that seal came the white horse. When he opened the second seal, then came another horse who was permitted to take peace. Every one of these is because the Lamb did something which brought about the black horse, which is the famine. Every one of them is directed by the Lamb as we work our way through that. And now he's at the sixth seal. So this is no different than the prior five. Every one of them has been an act taken on by the Son, the Lamb. He's bringing every one of these judgments. Think about this. Peace on the earth, the Antichrist. Is that really a judgment? It's great. It's peace and it's all good. Well, if I knew history in advance and I hated Germany, I'd give him Adolf Hitler as a leader in the 30s. Right? Because I know where he's going to do and I know how that ends for the Germans. So my point is, God knows who this guy is, and he gives them a leader who is a great judgment on them. So even the first seal, even though it's peace, is a judgment of God. You want that? Here you go. So that's how I would, when Jesus opens the first seal, that's when the wrath of God starts. And then the last line, and who can stand? Remember that the chapter and verse numbers are added much later by us to make it easy to find stuff. Chapter 7 answers this question. So, as I said earlier, I'll give the answer to the one question earlier in two parts. Part 2 of that answer is the 144,000, and we'll talk about them next time. And that is, in part, the answer of who can stand. So we'll probably relook at this quote a little bit as we launch into next week. Let me close this in prayer, and then please come ask questions if you have some. Dear Heavenly Father, we are so grateful for your word. And while we may not fully understand every aspect of everything we're reading, we do get the sense that you are awesome. You have power. You have control. You love us and will bring vengeance on those who have mistreated yours. You have everything planned to the last day. And we're grateful that you not only have that, but that you've revealed that to us. Maybe not in a way that we fully grasp every detail, but in a way that we can know for certain that you are sovereign and that you have a plan. And we're grateful for that, for the confidence and the hope that it brings us in dark times. Pray that we bring us all back together safely next week, and that we would have a good week this week as we live lives that bring you glory and honor. I pray all these things in Jesus' name.